So blynyddoedd yn amser hir i'r côr.
Again, good morning. We are here with Dr. John Ball on Gwynoro's People, my fourth guest. And John, of course, a very well-known person in Wales, a master economist, and he can tell us all about that. Well, croeso, John.
Thank you for the invitation, Gwynoro.
That's fine. So let's start. Where did John Ball first come across life?
I was born in Gorsainen Hospital some 70-odd years ago, before moving at a tender age of 4 to one of the new council estates in Swansea.
And which one was that? In Gendros or
Gendros.
Cwmbwrla, or?
Gendros. In fact, we were just on the edge of the estate facing Cwmbwrla Park. So I was very lucky as a young boy to be able just to cross the road and run around one of the lovely parks of Swansea, or one of the lovely parks as they were then.
So what was your primary school and secondary schools? What were they? Which ones were they then?
Oh, Cwmbwrla. I went to Cwmbwrla. Mind, I was very unhappy in school as a youngster. I went, strange how I ended up teaching for a living. And then, and then, of course, I was successful with the then 11 plus. I went to Dynevor Grammar School, to which I owe a great, great debt. There's no two ways about that.
So you didn't like school?
Didn't like junior school. Once I'd got to Dynevor, I started really to enjoy school. I enjoyed the studying, I enjoyed the rugby, enjoyed making new friends, and learning. I think I was very privileged to have gone to Dynevor. The schoolmasters there were amazing people, and much of my learning since, in many ways, has been rooted in that school.
There's a lot of that around, isn't there? People owe a lot to their education. Especially, I do the same, and I'm sure a lot of other people. What's the teachers, you think?
Well, I think it was interesting because at that time, of course, most of them were mature. They had fought in the war. Indeed, one of the schoolmasters, believe it or not, flew Churchill to Yalta, which we found amazing. Of course, as young men, this was fascinating stuff. The head of English flew Spitfires. So anyway, they were men who'd been to war, who'd mature, then went on to the government-sponsored degree programs. So their whole ability was totally unique.
And they'd been for the school of life.
Indeed, yes.
That is the one, isn't it?
Indeed, yes.
Yeah. So what happened after Dynevor then, John?
Well, I took an apprenticeship with what was then the National Coal Board, and did 6 months training underground. And I've said then that no one should work underground. That was not nice. It was an experience which I've never forgotten. And indeed, when I read novels about coal mining in Wales, then I can picture what's going on. Went from there to I went back to school just for a quick few months, and then went to do an apprenticeship and did 7 years with what was then Post Office Telephones. Did all kinds of jobs along the way. Then left there. I went to Addis factory, went to Aluminium Wire and Cable, Calagas. So I've done a few jobs.
You set off there. You've done 11 jobs.
Yeah, 11 in total. Yes,
that's got to be quite a record. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I find it amusing when one hears of people talking about their career, and I laugh and I say, well, I'm still waiting to start my career.
So you ended up in Mono, didn't you?
Yes. After I did my degree, I went to university as a mature student. I did a year at Mono Equipment in Forest Fach, manufacturers of bakery equipment, very, very successful local business, in many ways a model for the Welsh economy. We were deploying at that time some 200, turning over, I think it was £40 million a year, something like 40% has been exported, all good, qualified, well-experienced and well-paid workers.
Sorry, I skipped a bit there. I'm ahead of myself. There was your period as a mature student. But even before then, you became a councillor.
Oh, yes.
Don't forget that now, John. First primary councillor in Swansea, must be.
Yes, in 1976, the local government reorganisation, and I stood for what was then Swansea District Council and topped the poll. It's my claim to fame, I think. Not only was I Plaid Cymru's first councillor in Swansea, I did it with 48% of the poll, which I don't think has ever been surpassed, certainly not in Swansea.
How did you manage that then, John? That's a high poll, that's a high percentage support. You must have been popular in was it Gendros or Gwynoro?
No, this was the Old Llansamlet ward.
The Old Llansamlet ward.
It was interesting, actually. Some 18,000 electors. It was one of the wards that had never been reorganised.
Yeah.
And it stretched from Pentrachwyth on the side of the tower to Gleis at the top of the tower. That I built up a profile. But I do remember that I really attempted to knock on every door.
As well, you must have to have such a popular support. You weren't popular with Labour, I bet.
No, I wasn't very popular with Labour. When I won the seat, I must say, the atmosphere and the count, one or two, in fairness, of the Labour member who had been beaten because the ratepayers won the other seats, were quite understanding that this was a democratic process. But some of the Labour people were very upset.
Yes. Well, there we are, John. We'll carry on to your mature student days after this. Your first piece of music, Finlandia. What's behind that? Why the choice?
I've been privileged to have taught at the university in a place called Hämeenlinna in Finland, and I adore the place. The people are so proud of being Finnish, a small little nation on the fringes of Europe with their own language, their own culture, their own way of life, who are enormously proud not only of being Finnish, but of being part of the wider world. And this piece of music, to me, sums up this wonderful national spirit of a brave and strong people.
Well done. Okay. Does the music convey the mood and the character of the people, John?
There's an interesting story about Finlandia. At that time, Finland was in a province of Russia. And, of course, Sibelius was very much seen as the national musician of Finland. And the story goes that when that was first played in Helsinki, there were riots in the streets. That he had touched a nerve of the Finnish people. I think it's a wonderful piece of music.
And it made a big impact on the nation.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, now then, politics, you lost your seat just like I did in my time. And you ended up at university, a mature student.
Indeed.
In Cardiff.
Indeed, I did.
So what was the reasoning behind all that?
I think just a desire to prove I could do it. I was told enough times that I had a brain. I was told enough times that I could do more than I had done.
Yeah.
I'd been distracted maybe a little bit with my political work. And my parents, who of course are still alive at the time, said, look, John, you've got to grasp this nettle. Sometimes you just got to grasp the nettle and do it. And I would like to make the point that I was given a wonderful reference by Brachan Williams, who was my tutor at the Institute, because I'd done a year at the Institute.
Yeah.
And then did an interview at Cardiff with Dr. Ian Smith, whom I spoke to a little while ago, both of whom I owe a huge debt, because ultimately all I had was 5 O-levels. But they could see some ability there. And I was offered an unconditional place to study economics and management studies at what was then University College, Cardiff. I enjoyed it. It was an enormous challenge.
By that time, you were around what, early 30s?
33,
something of that kind.
Yes.
Now, did you find it a big change from you've been in work? You would, 10, 15 years had gone by. Was it a bit of a challenge?
I smile at that question, Gwynoro, because I remember the exams at the end of the first year. And I remember turning up, sitting at the desk, looking round, and a little voice inside me said, what on earth are you doing here? Why aren't you in work? It was a culture shock. But the opportunity to spend my life at that time developing and learning things I'd never learned before, reading about things I'd never heard about or never studied, was such a joyous time to be learning, such a joyous time.
So it's never too old. You're a classic example of it. You're never too old to learn. It's something you can still do at any age.
One of my colleagues, Charlie Swain, I remember his name so clearly, he had been a welder at East Moors. When the works closed, he decided to take a degree, pure economics, incidentally, which was involved a lot of mathematics.
Yes.
And Charlie I think he was 67.
Good Lord.
Proving that you're never, never too old, because
That's right.
education is a wonderful thing.
So you ended up with a degree?
Indeed.
In, was it economics?
Economics and management studies.
And where did you go after that? After achieving that, after that achievement?
Well, after my time in working in factories, I always said I wanted to go back to Addis, as it happens, as works manager. I never did. But I went to Mono Equipment in Forest Fach as assistant works manager. And I enjoyed that enormously. Very good example of a good local business. Very, very good local business. And then I had the opportunity to go to the WGA to work in a business development unit. Because at that time, it didn't last long, unfortunately. But at that time, economic development had changed course. And it was far more about building businesses from inside rather than attracting from outside.
Yes.
So I spent 10 years at a business development unit, ended up as business services manager in Carmarthen, which of course is here, of course. It's a lovely part of the world.
I remember it well.
And then I was offered the opportunity then to teach at Swansea Institute as course director of the MBA programme, and then Swansea University.
Before you go there now, quickly, I've read a few things of your treatise on various things in Wales, and one of them was you were very critical of the WTA, or that its achievements had been exaggerated, maybe. Is that so?
Yes. No question in my mind. I said it at the time, and I've said it since. We in the business development unit, we were working to build the economy from within, and we worked very hard. But we weren't the glory boys. The agency at the time had an army of people all over the world. I still don't know what they were doing. Because allegedly there were any number of Fords and Aston Martins and all out there allegedly desperate to come and set up in Wales, and the amount of money that was poured into inward investment was frankly obscene. I proved in my research, for example, and I'm not the only one, that you can, starting a business from scratch, there are issues, of course, but it's a very cheap way of providing employment and providing economic development. You're talking maybe a few £1,000s here and there out of the public fund, compared to millions that the agency was very happy to spend on businesses that really didn't want to be here. Said they'd provide a few jobs, which was say they never did. It's all a bit old hat now, because my views on this are well known. It's in the sense that the agency got the policy wrong.
Sorry. Yeah.
Fundamentally wrong.
Yeah. Yes, it's very interesting to notice how many of those firms are still around, isn't it?
There are none of them. I cannot honestly think of one. 3M's down the road from Gossynan from me. I think there are a few there. The Ford plant, of course, at Swansea's gone. With one or two, Ford and Bridgen is going. They're all gone or going.
There we go. Okay, we'll go from the WDA to the university in a minute. Your second piece of music, John. Gershwin.
Oh, I'm a great fan of what I call classical American music, and Gershwin, Cole Porter, I think it's just wonderful music. These were the classic composers of the 20th century. I like this, particularly because it brings back very warm memories. My father loved music, and my grandfather, William Henry Ball, was a very accomplished musician. He played a number of instruments. He wrote music, he transcribed music, won a number of competitions with then Gossynan Silver Band. And Strike Up the Band was the music which introduced a programme on what was then the home programme, which we had to listen to with Pa, quietly while Pa listened to the brass band music and listened to the band, and this was the music that introduced it.
Have music in the land, for everybody loves a band. A good old rousing melody is a joy and inspiration. 100 million folks agree that a tune can stir a nation. So music master, take command. Our hearts will beat to beat the band. Let the drums roll out, let the trumpet call, while the people shout, strike up the band. Hear the cymbals ring, calling one and all to that happy swing. Strike up the band. Yankee doodle-doo, doodle-doo, we'll come through. Yankee doodle-doo, for the red, white, blue doodle-doo. Lend a hand with the flag unfurled. We can face the world. Hey, leader, strike up the band. Let the drum roll on. Command of the band makes the band grand, and you can't go wrong with a happy song. Hey, leader! Hey, leader! Hey, leader, strike up the
Strike up the band. Bit different from Finlandia, John?
Yeah, I like all music. I must say, I smile at the lyrics are "The Man with a Stick." I think my grandfather wouldn't agree with that. He was a great conductor, and the baton with which he conducted the Gossynan Silver Band still exists. My cousin Janet has it.
Where did life take you after the WDA?
Well, I went to what was then Swansea Institute as MBA course director. which I really enjoyed. I was there for 10 years. That was a challenge because now I'd moved away entirely, if I like, because I was now teaching the things that I believed in, business and economics and so forth. And I really, really enjoyed that.
Tell us now then about your visit to the stock exchange. You know, I can only think of one other person, and that is the former First Minister, Carwyn Jones. Tell us this little story about all that.
Yes, my wife and I was teaching with me at the Institute. We'd arranged for students to visit the business premises, the stock exchange, the Federal Reserve and so forth in New York on an annual field visit. And we'd become firm friends with the then Director of Education. And on the second or third visit, he pulled me aside and said, look, will you stay back? We got a job for you. And Debbie, my wife, said to me, she said, you're going to ring the bell. So I thought, I must have gone white. And said, no, I said, ordinary boys from council houses in Swansea don't ring the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. But indeed, I was given that enormous privilege of ringing the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. It's a privilege which is unique and is something I look back on with enormous memories. I was a bag of nerves, mine.
I'm sure. I was going to ask you, the place must have been packed.
The noise is before the main change into electronic trading. So the noise from the floor was overpowering. And the bell, of course, you have to hold the button down for exactly 30 seconds. That clang, 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 I could hear quite clearly now. But it was an enormous privilege.
Yes, I'm sure it was. I've seen the photos.
Indeed.
It was excellent. When I first was told about it, to be honest, I didn't quite believe it. No, John Ball.
I still don't believe it.
But there you are. There is the evidence. You've got the T-shirt and you've got the pictures.
Indeed.
Eventually, you ended up at Swansea University.
Yes.
Lecturing economics?
Yes, I did 10 years at the Institute and had the opportunity then to go down the road to Swansea University. I want to say, Swansea Institute was a great college. It was very much a second opportunity college. And we had very high standards and we changed the lives of many, many people at the Institute. That was the culture of the place, the second chance sort of university. But I thought it'd be interesting to go and teach in what you like, if you like, a traditional university. And I taught then from 2008 until I finally retired in 2018. Though it was a bit patchy because I was doing contract work, then it'd be some teaching, then a few years in economics. But it brought economics very much back into my mind.
We can't let this interview end without coming back to the John Ball I know. And that is the John Ball that stands for Welsh independence and the nationhood of Wales. Tell us about how you feel about that and where we're at the moment.
Strangely enough, part of me is incredibly optimistic. The fact that Yes Cymru is now approaching 10,000 members, that these are just ordinary people, not party political, but see not only the weaknesses, but the opportunity. I'd like to say, though, I was hoping you'd ask me this. It's strange that someone from an English-speaking family in a council house in Swansea should have my opinions, but I'm not the only one. It's quite interesting that we are all, as it were, still Welsh, and I'd like to make a point here, if I may. It was quite interesting, the lessons of history. At Dynevor Grammar School, the head of history was Mr. Clifford Evans, his nickname was Bunny, and contrary to all the other secondary schools in Swansea, he was teaching Welsh history. So I learnt about Rebecca riots, the March on Newport, in which, incidentally, one of my ancestors allegedly took part, the rise of Cymru Fydd and so forth. And as a young man, as a young teenager, I thought, hang on a second, I'm not English. I have a culture and a history and indeed a language that is different. And that I think is what moved me, if you like. And as time has gone on, I've seen the cultural arguments, I've seen the linguistic arguments, and now I see the overpowering economic arguments.
Yes, well, that is where you're noted for, because I've seen some of your YouTube videos and other things. You make a strong case that Wales need not fear independence.
Not at all. What is really interesting, of course, over the past 10, 20 years, is that we now have what I call models. If you look at the small nations of Europe, for example, we already visited Finland during this programme. If you look at Estonia, the small nations of Europe that escaped the Soviet Union at the end of the 80s, they are all rich, bustling, nations who take pride in themselves, not simply in their economic success, but in their pride of being separate, sovereign nations who can build things the way they want them built.
Yes, and the issue there is very quickly, hopefully we'll have another programme about this after this is finished now, but very quickly, they don't have the hang-up of empire and things, do they? There is that is at the back of the mind of Welsh and British people.
I've often said, we've heard people say that we are turning our backs on 500 years of history in the UK. We're not. We're turning our backs on 500 years of propaganda. I still find it interesting that even Welsh language schools will teach things like the Hanoverian dynasty and such like this. But no, indeed, a lot of these, to a great extent, and maybe this is the hang-up we have here, is this idea that we're all part of this wonderful magic thing called Britannia.
Well, there we go. Anyway, let me tell you, we're now coming to the third one and final choice, and which is, David, you are?
No comment. I think this sums it up. We are still here.
Mawhid certainly applies to you and I, John. Despite everything and everyone, we are still here.
Indeed we are.
Well, there we go, folks. That was Dr. John Ball, my fourth guest. The next one should be Nigel Owens, the world-famous Welsh referee. We'll confirm that in the next few days. My thanks to John. Thanks, of course, to the boss, Alan Evans, the editor. Without him, none of this is possible. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you for listening. Goodbye now.